Today we're back in Dragonheir Silent Gods to talk about how you can fully optimize your equipment so you get the most value for your gold. Now, if you haven't yet downloaded Dragonheir Silent Gods, this game has had already over 5 million downloads in less than a month since the global launched and is ranked #1 in downloads in 13 different regions. So you can use the link in the description to download the game, and this video is sponsored by the makers of Dragonheir Silent Gods. Whether you play on Android, iOS, or PC via the Epic Games Store or Steam or a Mac, you can download Dragonheir Silent Gods, and the gameplay is cross-platform, so you can be playing on your PC and then pick up exactly where you left off on your iPhone or Android device when you're out and about, which is how I like to play. So a big thank you again to the makers of Dragonheir Silent Gods for sponsoring today's video, and let's get into how you can level up your game with equipment. By the way, in case you've not been following along with the official Dragonheir Silent Gods Facebook page, they just recently teased a huge collaboration with Dungeons & Dragons. Drizzt is going to be showing up in Dragonheir Silent Gods, and it looks like that's going to be on the 17th, the Righteous Drow Ranger, setting foot in the enchanting world of Dragonheir. So I'm really hyped to see his story, and I'm also kind of hyped to see what his elemental affinity is going to be and what his class is going to be, and selfishly, I'm hoping he's Frost, since most of my legendary pulls have been Frost units, and he could make my lineup really, really nutty. On the topic of improving your lineups, there is an event going on, the Celestial Alternate Summons. Now look, this depends on when your server was created. I started this particular account right around when the game went live in the Steam store for download. But this is an event where you can choose a blessing for the legendary hero of your choice. There are 9 total heroes that you can choose from. And as you go and you summon, if you don't get your legendary hero, but you get some other legendary hero, your chances go up and up and up for getting your desired legendary. I believe that the multiplier is like 2x, then 4x, then 10x, then 20x. So if you're really interested in one of the legendaries that is here, you can select it, but I will advise you to make sure you've got at least 35 dice before rolling to take advantage of the pity system in the game, since that does not transfer from one banner to another. So if you're going to do this thing, I would definitely kind of move in until you get your legendary, and you are going to want to have a lot of dice saved up because it would kind of suck to run out of dice before you get your actual pull, but your chances have gone way, way up. Now, equipment in this game gives your heroes a significant boost in their power, and having optimized sets of gear goes an extremely long way in making the difference between you're struggling to clear a high-level dungeon or clearing it with ease. In fact, a big part of your seasonal journey is working on your equipment. So in this video, we're going to talk about how you get gear, the type of stats that you should really be looking out for, and what gear sets you should be using on your heroes. Now, first of all, let's talk about how you get and level up your gear. You're going to run into dungeons called Grave of Venom, Curse, and Rot. And these 3 dungeons are the main sources of farming gear. And the higher stages you can clear, the higher difficulties you can complete, the higher tier of gear you can obtain. Now, granted, these dungeons get a little bit tricky as you go up in the difficulties, so be ready to have sort of multiple heroes designed to counter the different mechanics that you'll see in each dungeon. For example, poison stacks in the Grave of Rot. You're going to need specific heroes to counter what these dungeons are doing, get to the best gear, and farm it up, okay? And as you do that, you can progress further and further into the game. But once you have your gear, regardless of the rarity, common, rare, epic, or legendary, you still need to refine it. So refining a piece of gear adds between 1 to 3 random new substats depending on the rarity. Like, for example, this common piece here, when refined, can add up to 2 random stats, while this legendary might add only 1. Now, you'll notice that these orange numbers next to some of the stats on the legendary are because this piece of gear has enhanced or double-rolled stats. So epics can have 2 stats that are sort of rolled again or double-rolled, and legendaries can have up to 4 stats that are rolled again to higher and higher levels. So one trick for some people is that they're farming legendary gear, you can actually save a lot of gold by only refining legendaries to 4 and seeing what the sort of 4 substats are. Because, man, I mean, 500,000 gold to fully refine a piece of gear is a lot, and it chews through your gold quickly. So first, see if you like the substats, then decide if you want to keep going. That way you can kind of save your gold, and you can test more of these different pieces to see if they're ones that you really want to invest in. It's also noteworthy that your helmet will always roll hit points as its main stat, as you can see here up top, while weapons will always roll attack. Chest and gloves, on the other hand, have a random pool of stats that they can roll as the main stat. And you should definitely take that into consideration when you're deciding which pieces you keep and which ones you ultimately sell off. In fact, a small feature that a lot of people don't actually know about is that you can upgrade your gear that you've already obtained to higher rarities, which is really, really good in the cases where you have a piece with amazing substats that you want to keep using. So you can upgrade it, and then you don't have to worry about doing a bunch of rolling later to see if you land on stuff that's really great or makes the piece not viable. So you can head to your camp, click on the forging bench, and then equipment refinement. This menu, not a lot of people actually know about. Well, I mean, you can refine gear from the character screen, which will make your life easier. But anyways, from here, you can use these special philosopher stones that you get from quests, missions, and some events in order to upgrade your gear to higher rarity. And you can even choose the set that you want to upgrade it to when you're upgrading the rarity tier. But remember, these philosopher stones are pretty scarce. So you want to use them for pieces that you're really confident that you're happy with and you're going to keep using. Although specific gear stats are obviously important, it's not that important when we're talking about common or rare gear, which is what you're going to be starting with in your first few hours of playing. But once you're able to actually upgrade your heroes to 70 and 90 to unlock the 3rd upgrade for your forging bench, that's around the time when you should be looking at investing in some really great epic gear. This is going to be a huge power up for your heroes and your ability to clear higher level content. But most importantly, this is where having the right stats on the right heroes makes a massive difference. Now, before we look at these specific sets, if you wanted to see the stats that each piece of gear can roll, click on the filter icon and you can look at the primary and secondary attributes. Primary is what we've been calling main stats. Secondary are what we've been calling the sort of secondary stats or attributes of that piece of armor. So to start, let's look at the damage dealer sets and what sets work with certain types of heroes. You can get the attack set from the Grave of Venom, which by the way is probably the easiest dungeon to farm, and you'll be able to use gear you get from this dungeon to progress further into the other ones. So most of the time you'll be wanting the Barbarian set for epic or Imperial Executioner set for legendary. These sets are all around super solid for any damage dealer with a big damage ultimate, giving you a lot of attack and crit rate. Perfect for a hero like Sigrid, for example, in the rare tier, who we talked about in the last video and should be one of your top investments for most players in the early game. On top of that, or the Barbarian set, you want to look out for specific stats on each piece. The absolutely most ideal scenario would be that you get crit rate, crit damage, attack percent on your helmet, and your weapon for your substats. And then on your chest piece, you want things like attack percent as the main stat, with crit rate, crit damage as the substats. And lastly, your gloves, you're looking at crit rate percent as the main stat, crit damage and attack percent as the substats. And if you manage to land even just 2 of the 3 ideal stats, you're doing pretty darn good, and you should keep that piece. Now, that said, there are going to be some exceptions here. And there are going to be places where you want to look at the other 2 sets. The first thing that would make you want to do that is sort of derivative damage dealers. And secondly, sort of fast auto-attacking damage dealers. You might want to go with some other sets. So let me explain that. Let's look at the derivative damage dealers, for example, and use probably the best, most well-known PvE hero in the game. That's Flora. Flora is a perfect example of a derivative damage dealer. Looking at their ultimate skill, where again, if you don't know how, you can check what each skill scales with. You just click the icon and you can see the sort of percentage buffs that you get from different stats. The second part of her skill is the most crucial bit here in this case, though. It works super well with her main comp with other heroes, consisting of wild heroes, constantly proccing wild checks and dealing damage, and you'll notice that the skill says it is derivative fire damage, as opposed to just fire damage. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the damage from this part of the skill cannot crit. And instead, as you can read on the right here, it's actually enhanced by the Enlightenment stat. So for certain derivative damage dealers, you actually want to run the Assassin Technique set in Epic or the Phantom Knight set in Legendary because of the attack and Enlightenment set bonuses that they're going to give you. For stats, you're mainly looking for Enlightenment, especially as a main stat on your chest piece and as a substat on the rest, while having attack percent as the main stat on the gloves and then as a substat on the other three. Other than that, it's pretty flexible per hero. For heroes that apply debuffs to deal damage, you'd look for accuracy. Accuracy is really critical. You need to land the debuffs. If a hero has a mix of derivative and regular damage in their kit, then you could also have some crit rate and crit damage if needed, but that's not going to scale perfectly, okay? There are some supports in the game that can stack off of Enlightenment and attack as well, such as Hexandra, who we also talked about in my early game investment heroes. So these sets would work well on heroes like her. Just remember to check sort of how your heroes are scaling up their effectiveness. Another exception or sort of special situation you might want to look for is the Predator set in Epic and the Heart of the Gambler set in Legendary, which, like I said before, is really good on auto attack based heroes because of the set bonus that they give, attack speed. So a perfect example will be the Dauntless heroes in the Lightning Affinity that specialize in basic attack damage, or even other heroes like Usha, the rare Frost DPS hero who gets a lot of attack speed and deals a lot of damage off of her basic attacks. This set, you mainly just want to look for attack percent, crit rate, crit damage, really similar to the Barbarian and Executioner set we talked about earlier in the video. Again, attack percent on your chest piece as the main stat, and crit rate on your gloves. Now, moving forward from the damage sets, let's look at two sets that you can obtain from the Grave of Curse, known as the tank and support sets. First, we have to look at the Ancestral Protection and Granite sets. These are considered the tank sets in the Epic and Legendary tier. You really cannot go wrong putting this on your frontliner, and the stats you want to look for will vary depending on the tank. Some scale with max hit points, so you want hit point percentage. Like Garius here will scale with defense, so you'd want defense percentage. But in general, defense, hit points, and resistance are all solid to work with and will suit most of your pure tank heroes. On the other hand, we have the Radiance and Blessing sets. Those are your support sets. These are good on units that need to be tanky, but also scale with Enlightenment. So looking at Philosia here, you can see that she wants pure Enlightenment because she doesn't do much damage, and we want to keep her alive as long as possible, especially in activities like Temporal Vortex. Doing massive AoE, she will benefit from the extra Enlightenment and hit points. Main stats for heroes like Philosia are Enlightenment and defense percentage, so they can stay tanky. So finally, there's a couple more things we're going to look at here. Let's look at the Grave of Rot sets, which are considered the Debuffer sets. This is because both sets give accuracy in their bonuses. And as we talked about earlier, higher the accuracy you have, the more likely you are to land your debuffs. If you've explored some of the higher level dungeons, the bosses have extremely high resistance. We're talking like 220 plus. So having a lot of accuracy to stay above that threshold will make sure you can land your debuffs consistently. Both are quite similar, but in most cases you want a set of Swift Shadowhood or Brotherhood Spirit. That's the legendary counterpart, as opposed to the Deer Hunter and Holy Hunter set, unless it's a unique situation, which I suppose we might talk about. But this is because the skill Haste is really useful in places like dungeons where you want to keep a debuff like attack penalty on the boss constantly so your team doesn't get one shot, or even in PvP potentially, where you want to debuff the enemy team before they're able to get their main damage off. The case where you'd take the Hunter set is in places like Fey Meander, where in the later stages, the poison stacks can get super annoying, especially for like a squishier debuff support. Therefore, you want to stack resistance to counter the debuff stacking. The main stats you're looking for, again, is accuracy mostly, especially as a main stat on the chest piece, and the rest is usually attack percent, but varies from hero to hero. In general, you actually want to try to avoid just flat base stats on your chest piece, because the stat pool can roll percentage stats, which generally is going to give way more stats, but there's always, some special cases as well. So I don't want to give that as a, rule of thumb and not list that there will be some exceptions, I'm sure. You'd also look for more skill haste as well as other tanky stats like hit point percent and defense percent to fire off skills even quicker or keep your supports alive for longer. So the last thing here is the 2 more spots we have underneath the gear set, and those are for runes. This is a positive rune on the left and a negative rune on the right, and you can get these from the Ancient Battlefield and Heretical Ruins. These pretty much match whatever set or stats you're focusing on per hero, but the main stats you want to look for are attack, crit damage, enlightenment, and defense in the positive rune, and you have attack, hit points, or defense and resistance in the negativity rune. Having a resistance negativity rune handy can make a big difference in some difficult boss fights like Fey Meander or the Grave of Curse boss. Now keep in mind, you're going to work on your equipment every season, which is fun and very important. And it's fast-paced because it resets every season. But this is a topic for another video. If you enjoyed this vid, throw a like on here and consider subscribing. Hopefully this has really helped you suit up your heroes as optimally as you can and sort through the hundreds of pieces of gear you may already have sitting in your inventory where you're like, hey, what do I do with all this? Now, if you haven't yet downloaded the game and you're interested in getting started on your hero collection and your equipment collection, check out that link again in the description. As I mentioned earlier, the game's in Steam, Epic Games Store, Mac, iOS, and Android. And a big thank you again to Dragonheir Silent Gods for sponsoring today's video. If you are looking for more videos about Dragonheir Silent Gods, check out the cards in the end screen. I'll give you my top 5 early game hero investments that are amazing, or check out my top 5 new player mistakes. You don't want to make those, so you can get a quick start in the game.